Vought International owns the sky. It owns the men who fly through it, the labs that made them, the news that covers them, and the senators who pretend to regulate them. It owns the DNA. It owns the merchandise. It owns the funerals. But there's one man they can't touch. He isn't a product. He was never grown in a Vought lab, never fed Compound V as a baby, never signed a contract at 9 years old. He built himself. A man in a cave with a box of scrap and a car battery dying, who put a magnet in his own chest and walked out wearing a suit he welded together by hand. No company made him. No company can unmake him. In a world where every hero is a corporate asset, Tony Stark is the one variable Vought never planned for. Here's what happens when you drop him in. How Vought tries to buy him, and what a $1 trillion offer sounds like to a man who already has more money than they do. How the Seven handle a rival who is smarter than all of them combined and has no powers at all. How Butcher reacts to a soup who isn't a soupy. How Homelander's ego cracks the day the world falls in love with a man he can't bully, can't buy, and can't threaten. Because Tony Stark has never once been afraid of a bully. And how it ends, in the air over Manhattan, live, on every screen on Earth. At this point in the timeline, we're early. Season 1, roughly. Homelander is still doing the smile. The Seven still look like a team from the outside. Translucent is still alive. Butcher is still working alone, still chasing a rumor, and Huey Campbell has not yet had the worst day of his life. Most of the chaos hasn't happened yet. It's about to. The quantum tunnel held for 11 seconds. It needed 12. In the last one, the coordinates slipped, and the first thing Tony Stark saw on the other side was a man in a cape and a stars and stripes collar hanging in the air above a skyline, arms folded, smiling for a camera drone. The Chiron under him on a 100-foot screen read, Homelander, live. Tony did not know the name yet. He knew the smile. He had built weapons for men who smiled like that. He came down hard on a rooftop in what should have been Midtown. The landing cratered 8 inches of tar and gravel. The faceplate lifted on its own, which meant the suit had already decided he needed air more than armor. Power at 9%. The voice in his helmet said. There was no way to route around it. 9%. He had left with 61. He sat there a while. Long enough for the tar to stop smoking. The heist had been 6 people, and 1 plan, and the plan had 6 failure points, and he had personally signed off on all of them. Somewhere behind him, in a version of the world where the numbers had held, the others were already gone, already home, already counting who had come back. He ran the math anyway. He always ran the math. The tunnel was one way from this side. He had known that in theory. Now it was weather. He stood up and looked at the city. It was New York. It was almost exactly New York. The grid was right. The water towers were right. The sound was right. That low harbor groan under everything. But the buildings had the wrong names on them. There was no Stark Tower. Where it should have been, a black glass spike went up 80-odd floors with a white V on the crown, lit from inside like a tooth. Vought International, said the sign. Below it, in letters 4 stories tall, protecting you, always. Tony had spent enough of his life inside advertising to know when a company was apologizing in advance. He came down the fire escape on foot because flying at 9% was how you became a stain. Street level smelled the same. The people looked the same. The difference took 11 blocks to find, and when he found it, He did not understand it right away. There were superheroes on the bus shelters, not athletes, not actors playing them, faces he had never seen, in costumes with sponsor patches stitched at the hip, and under each one a slogan and a release date. A woman in white with a bank logo on her thigh, a man with lightning on his chest advertising an energy drink and a streaming special. Every one of them had a merchandising line, every one of them had a movie. Tony stopped in front of a poster and read it twice. They franchised it, he said, to nobody. Somebody looked at all this and thought, what this needs is a quarterly. 2 blocks later, the street stopped moving. A tanker had gone over on the ramp at 9th, jackknifed and burning at the hitch, and the traffic behind it had folded into a metal accordion. Tony counted 4 cars in the crush zone. He counted a school bus 20 yards back with its emergency door already open and kids coming out in a line, which meant somebody sensible was on that bus. Then the crowd started cheering, and that was the part he never forgot. A soup came down out of the smoke, blue and gold, jaw like a shovel, and he landed exactly the way people land when they have practiced landing. Behind him came a van. Not an ambulance, a van white with a camera rig on the roof, and a woman in a headset already out of the passenger door with a tablet, walking backward, framing the shot. The super went to the 3rd car in the crush. Not the 1st, the 3rd. Tony watched him pick that car up and hold it over his head, which took the strength of a crane and about as much thought. The woman with the tablet counted him in. He held. He turned 9 degrees so the burning tanker sat over his left shoulder, because that was the better background. He set the car down on the far side of the barrier and pulled the driver out through the window, and the driver came out crying, and the crowd screamed, and 40 phones went up. The 1st car was still under the trailer. Tony had already started moving before he knew he had. He shoved through a knot of people filming, went low along the barrier where the heat was survivable, and got down where he could see. There were 2 people in that 1st car, a man in the driver's seat, unconscious, and a girl of maybe 9 belted in the back with her hands over her ears. He turned and shouted at the soup, "Hey, Blue. 1st car, 2 inside." The soup looked at him. That was the thing. He looked. His eyes went to the car and came back and went to the camera, and he said very reasonably that the scene was not secure yet. "Fuel line," said Tony. "It's leakin', not sprayin'. You've got maybe 90 seconds. The woman with the tablet said something into her headset. The soup did not move. Tony understood then that he was not looking at cowardice. Cowardice would have been faster. This was scheduling. He put the faceplate down. Power at 9%. Repulsors are not advised. Not using them, he said. He used the suit for exactly 2 things, and he chose them like a man spending his last money. He used the shoulder actuators to bend the door frame, which cost 4%, and he used the palm emitters at their lowest setting to push the burning fuel wash sideways for 11 seconds, which cost 3 more. Everything else was hands. He got the man out first because the man was closest to the fire. Then he went back in head first for the girl and cut the belt with the edge of a gauntlet and told her the only true thing he had. "You okay, kid? Get behind me." She was not okay. She held on to the back of his neck plate the whole way out. He was 40 feet clear when the tanker went, and the shockwave put him down on one knee with the girl's face in his chest and the suit's back plating glowing dull orange. 2%. The suit stopped talking to him after that. Behind him, the soup caught the pressure wave on his back and made it look like a decision. Nobody died in the first car. Tony learned later that somebody died anyway. A man in a delivery van 60 yards up the ramp, pinned and awake the entire time, who had been screaming into a phone while a superhero picked the photogenic car. The cameras never turned that way. Nobody filmed it. In the version that ran that night, he was not there at all. Tony did not know that yet either. What he knew, kneeling on hot asphalt with a 9-year-old attached to his neck, was that the crowd had turned around. They were filming him. Not the blue one. Him. A man in a scorched red and gold shell who had crawled into a fire with no cape, no logo, no van, and come out twice. He could hear the questions starting. Who is that? What company is he? Is he new? Somebody asked if he had an Instagram. He got the girl to a paramedic and stood up, and his legs told him what the suit already had. He walked 6 blocks before he let himself stop, in an alley off 10th, and put a hand on the brick. Then he ran the last piece of math, the one he had been avoiding since the rooftop. The tunnel was gone. The team was gone. The compound in his own timeline did not exist here, and the people who could have built it did not know his name, and there was no Pepper here, no roadie, no kid in Queens. He was one man in a dying suit in a city that had put its heroes on bus shelters. He said it out loud so it would be real. There's no way home. Above him, on the black glass spike, the white V went on burning. 6 days later, Tony had pulled 11 people out of things and learned that none of it counted. The first one was easy and it taught him nothing. A scaffold collapse on Atlantic. 2 workers on a swinging plank at the 4th floor. 90 seconds of careful work with a cable and a bent I-beam. He did it in a welding mask and a canvas coat because the suit had nothing left in it. Nobody filmed that one. It went fine. The second one taught him everything. A gas main went under a block of walk-ups in Sunset Park at 4 in the morning. Tony was 8 blocks away, which was not luck because he had started sleeping near the scanner. He got there before the fire did. He got 9 people out of a stairwell that had already started to lean, and he went back in for a 10th and found a woman under a fallen door frame who was very calm and very trapped, and he lay on his stomach in the smoke and talked to her while he cut. Her name was Marisol. She asked if he was one of them. He said no. Good, she said. He got her out. He was still counting heads on the sidewalk when the first vehicle arrived, and it was not the fire department, and it was not an ambulance. It was a black car with a vault plate frame, and a man in a very good suit got out with a folder. The ambulance came 4 minutes after him. Tony timed it. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and by the time the paramedics were kneeling on the concrete, the man with the folder had already spoken to 6 of the 9 people Tony had carried down that stairwell. He had a soft voice, and a pen and a form, and the form had a number printed on it, and the number was $12,000. Tony stood close enough to hear the pitch. It was beautiful work, in the way a trap is beautiful. It was never a bribe. It was an expression of sympathy, an acknowledgement of distress, a good faith gesture from a company that cared. And the only thing it asked in return was a signature agreeing not to characterize the events of the evening publicly in a manner inconsistent with the official account. There was no official account yet. That was the part that stopped him. They had brought the release before they had written the lie. Marisol signed. She had a burn along her forearm and no insurance and 2 kids on a curb in pajamas, and she signed, and the man in the suit thanked her by name. And Tony watched $12,000 buy a woman's mouth at 4:20 in the morning. Later he found out why they had come at all. A soup called Blind Spot had been on a training route over Sunset Park an hour earlier and had cracked a distribution line with a bad landing. That was all. One clumsy man in the sky, 3 buildings, 41 displaced, and a woman who would not straighten her arm properly again. The news at 7 called it aging infrastructure. Tony watched the broadcast standing up in a bodega with a coffee going cold in his hand. Aging infrastructure. Then a segment about a hero's charity gala. Then the weather. He went back to Sunset Park that afternoon, and the crater was already tarped, and there was a sign up saying the site was under active remediation, and the sidewalk had been jet-washed. Not repaired. Washed. They cleaned it, he said. They cleaned it before they fixed it. He stopped expecting the world to notice after that. He started building. He found the machine shop in Red Hook because it was condemned, and it was condemned because the roof had come down in one corner, and the roof had come down because nobody had spent $40,000 on it in 19 years. It sat under the expressway with the water 200 yards off, and a rail spur rusted into the floor. 11,000 square feet. 3-phase power still live in the wall, which was either an oversight or the last decent thing the city did for him. He bought it for cash that was not his, using a shell he built in an afternoon out of a laptop from a pawn shop on Van Brunt. He was not proud of it. He wrote the amount down anyway, in a notebook, because he intended to pay it back, and because a man who stops writing things down is a man who has started lying to himself. He slept on a mover's blanket for the first 11 nights. The work was slower than anything he had done since he was 17. There was no Jarvis here, no Friday, no fabrication bay, no sintering, no lab-grown anything. He had one dying suit, a scanner, and a city full of scrap. He stripped a commercial autoclave for its pressure vessel. He pulled the arc rig out of a shuttered fabrication yard in Greenpoint for $800 and a story about an art project. He got the Mark VI back to 31% by rebuilding a charging bench out of an electric bus charger and a lot of patience, and the day it hit 31, he sat down on the floor and laughed until it stopped being funny. Then he went and got the blood. He got it the ugly way, which was the only way available. A soup called Fireborn put a man through the window of a check-cashing place on Columbia during what the network later described as a heroic apprehension. Fireborn cut his own hand on the frame going in. 4 drops on the tile, and Vought's cleanup crew was 30 seconds out, and Tony went in low along the wall with a swab and came out with 2 of them. The analysis took 9 days, and it broke his heart in stages. The first stage was simple confusion. The sample had a compound in it that had no business being in a human being. Not a virus, not a mutation, not radiation, not a bite, not a god, not an accident. It was manufactured. It had a carrier medium. It had stabilizers. It had, and this was the detail that made him put down the pipette and walk outside for 10 minutes, a preservative. You do not put a preservative in an accident. You put a preservative in inventory. The second stage was the dosing. He ran the concentration curves twice because he did not believe them. Whatever this was, it did not work on adults reliably. The molecular scaffolding needed a developing nervous system to bind to. It needed someone young. It needed, if you were being efficient about it, someone very young indeed. The third stage was the batch marker. Every industrial compound Tony had ever manufactured carried one, because you cannot recall a product you cannot trace. This one had a 5-character batch marker sitting right there in the mass spec like a factory stamp on the inside of a fender. He stared at it for a long time. "There it is," he said. "It's not a miracle. It's a product line." He named it in his notebook by the only thing the marker gave him, a V and a number. He sat with that for 3 days and did the arithmetic he had been avoiding since the ramp on 9th. There were maybe 200 branded soups in this country. Every one of them had been a child once, and every one of them had a parent who signed something, and behind them there was a plant, and a supply chain, and a compliance department, and a line item. Somewhere in that black glass spike, a person with a job title had approved the unit cost of this, and every single one of those people had a comms team, a legal team, and a man with a folder who could get to a burning block 4 minutes before the ambulance. Tony Stark had built weapons for 20 years, and he had told himself the whole time that the thing he was selling was deterrence. Then he had stood in a cave with a piece of his own product in his chest and learned what he was actually selling. He had made a rule that day, and he had kept it badly, and he had never once stopped believing it. You are responsible for what you build. Personally. By name. In public. Nobody in that tower had ever heard that sentence in their lives. He looked around the shop at 11,000 square feet of rust and one suit at 31%, and he understood that he was not going to get home and that he had stopped, at some point in the last week, trying. "Fine," he said. "If the strong won't pick up the tab, the ordinary people pay it. They always pay it." He picked up the arc torch. Not this time. 99 floors up, the room was very quiet, and that was the problem. The screen at the end of the table had a single frame on it, paused. A man in scorched red and gold coming out of a stairwell in Sunset Park with a woman over his shoulder. 41 seconds of vertical phone video shot by a teenager on a curb. 11 million views in 6 days. No brand, no slogan, no release. The number under it was worse than the views. Trust rating, unaided, 68%. Nobody in the 7 had cracked 60 in 4 years. Somebody said the word organic like it was a disease. They sent Ashley Barrett to Red Hook on a Tuesday with 3 lawyers and a media buyer. And Ashley arrived the way weather arrives. She had a headset she did not need indoors, a folder she never opened, and the specific brightness of a woman who had been screamed at that morning and would be screamed at again that night. The shop doors were open because the arc rig cooked the air. Tony was under the left gauntlet with a magnifier clipped to his glasses when he heard 8 shoes on concrete. "You can stand there," he said. "Don't touch the bench." Ashley told him he was hard to find. He told her he was in the phone book, which was not true, and she laughed 1/4 of a second too long. Then she gave the pitch, and Tony had to admit it was a good one. They had run him. They had his blood pressure, his sleep, the shell company on Van Brunt, the $800 in Greenpoint. They knew he had no birth certificate anywhere in the system, and they had elected not to care, because a man with no past was an easier man to write. They had already built him. That was the part that turned his stomach. Before they ever knocked, They had focus grouped him in Cleveland and Tampa, and he had tested through the roof with women 35 to 54, and with veterans, and with, for reasons nobody could explain, teenage boys in the Midwest. The name they had picked was Ironclad. Ashley said it like she was handing him a gift. The number came out of the second lawyer's mouth. Flat, the way you say a number you have said before. 40 million a year, guaranteed 3-year term. 10% of merchandising net on a line they estimated at 220 million in year 1. Action figures, a helmet replica, a cereal, a suite of licensing partners already circled. A film in development. A charitable foundation with his name over the door, and a budget he would never have to look at. And the last thing, which they saved, because they always save it. A slot in the 7. The room waited. Tony understood that the waiting was scripted too, that there was a beat here where the person on the other side of the table went pale and quiet and said, yes. Ashley had probably watched 20 men do it. He wiped his hands on a rag. Which one of the 7? He said. Who am I replacing? Ashley said that was a transition matter and transitions were handled internally. Ah, said Tony. So there's a spot open because somebody's about to have an accident. Great. Love a growth industry. That was the one. He gave himself one and stopped. Then he asked for the thing they had not offered, and he asked for it in the mildest voice he owned, because he had learned 20 years ago in a boardroom in Malibu that the quiet questions are the ones that get answered. He asked for the batch records. Nobody moved. He said it again, plainly. Compound V, manufacturing sites, lot numbers, adverse event logs, and the consent files for every subject dosed under the age of 2. He said he was not asking to publish them. He said he wanted to read them once before he put his name on anything, because his name went on things and stayed there. The first lawyer said he did not know what Tony was referring to. Tony said the batch marker out loud. 5 characters. He watched the second lawyer's pen stop. Ashley recovered fast, and Tony respected her a little for it. She said this was a wonderful conversation, and that there were people much better placed than her to discuss product history, and that in the meantime the offer stood, and that frankly 40 was negotiable. 60, said the media buyer, who had misread the room completely. Tony put the gauntlet down. He walked past them to the roll-up door and put it up, and the light came in off the water, and outside on Van Brunt there were already 9 people with phones, because there were always 9 people with phones now. He had counted them all week. He had, if he was honest with himself, waited for a morning when the lawyers and the phones were in the same place. He stood in the doorway where both could see him, and he was unfailingly polite. He thanked them for coming. He said the money was real money, and the offer was serious, and he did not want anyone to think he was insulted. Then he said the sentence, and he said it slowly, because he wanted it clean on 9 microphones at once. I'm not for sale, he said. Not because I'm better than you. Because if I take your money, then when your product hurt somebody, I have to say it didn't. And I'm not doing that again. Somebody on the sidewalk asked what product? Ask them, said Tony. Then he said the other thing, the one that cost them more than the refusal did, and he said it looking at the lens and not at Ashley. If your building falls down, or your gas line goes, or something lands on your street that shouldn't have, call the number on my door. I'll come. It's free. Nobody signs anything. He went back inside and put the roll-up down and did not slam it. The clip was on 4 million screens in 90 minutes. Ashley made it as far as the car before she called it in. She stood on the cobbles by the rail spur with a hand over one ear and said the 2 sentences she had been rehearsing since the roll-up door went up. He asked for the batch records. He said the marker out loud. The voice on the other end told her to repeat it. She repeated it. Then the voice told her that this conversation had not occurred, and hung up, and Ashley stood there for a while looking at a condemned machine shop under an expressway, and understanding, in a quiet and unwelcome way, that she had just watched the only honest transaction of her career and had been on the wrong side of it. Inside the tower, a woman in compliance pulled the entire contract archive going back to 1968 and confirmed what everybody already suspected, but nobody wanted to be the one to say. In 58 years, across 311 signed heroes, not one had ever declined. They had negotiated, defected, overdosed, died, and been quietly written out of continuity. Nobody had ever just said no with the cameras running. There was no clause for it. There was no playbook page. Legal had a process for a hero who killed a civilian, and no process at all for a hero who refused a check. They took it to the 99th floor at 8:40 that night. Homelander watched the 41 seconds twice. He did not interrupt. He did not smile the way he smiled on the screens outside, and the 4 people in the room noticed that, and 2 of them stopped breathing normally. Then he asked one question. Does he have powers? The analyst said no. No V in the blood, no augmentation, nothing. Just engineering. Just a man in a machine he built himself. Homelander said nothing for 11 seconds. Down in Red Hook, Tony Stark sat on an upturned crate with a bowl of cold noodles and watched his own face on a phone screen while, 300 feet up the block, a black car with no plates idled at the curb with its lights off. 99 floors up, Homelander stood and buttoned nothing and looked at the paused frame of a man carrying a woman out of a stairwell. Find out what he's afraid of, he said, and then break it. 9 blocks east, 3 men were building a room designed to kill him. They had 11 days of surveillance and 1 working theory. The theory was simple. Anything that flies is a soup. Anything that is a soup is a monster. Monsters get handled before they get comfortable. Butcher had watched the contract footage 40 times. He did not see a man turning Vought down. He saw a better commercial. Mother's Milk argued the point for 6 of those 11 days. No compound fever in the blood work they had lifted from a discarded coffee cup. No V in the sweat sample off a gym towel. Nothing. Butcher said the labs lied about everything else, so why not that? Frenchie said nothing at all and kept welding. The room they built was a decommissioned refrigeration warehouse on Beard Street. Concrete floor, steel ribs, 40 feet of ceiling, 1 door. Frenchie ran 200 liters of liquid nitrogen into ceiling manifolds. He mounted 4 industrial magnets salvaged from a scrapyard crane. He wired a homemade electromagnetic pulse into the light fixtures. He rigged a car crusher, a real one, on a chain hoist over the center of the floor. The bait was better than the trap. A forged manifest planted in a dock office, listing a refrigerated shipment of unmarked pharmaceutical stock leaving Red Hook at 2 in the morning. Vought routing codes. Infant dosages. Tony read it at 11 at night and stopped chewing. He went in at 1:50, not in the flying suit. In the ground rig, the one he had built out of a shipping crate and a stolen forklift battery, because the flying suit was at 31%, and he was saving it for something he could not yet name. The ground rig walked. It did not fly. It weighed 400 pounds, and it was slower than he liked. He was 30 feet inside when the door came down behind him. The nitrogen hit first. Minus 196 degrees, dumping out of the ceiling, and a white curtain designed to make flesh brittle and metal shatter. Frost climbed the faceplate in 2 seconds. Tony did not move toward the door. He moved toward the coldest point, because the coldest point was under the manifold, and under the manifold the gas was already spent. Then the magnets came on. 400 pounds of armor slammed sideways into a steel rib hard enough to crack a human spine. His left gauntlet folded. The suit reported a shoulder actuator gone. Up on the catwalk, Mother's Milk had a shotgun on him, and Frenchie had a hand on the crusher release, and Butcher was leaning on the rail with the patience of a man watching a kettle. "Cold, wasn't it?" Butcher said. "Sorry about that. We do it quick round here." Tony hung off the rib by his own armor and looked up at them. "You built a magnet trap," he said, "for a guy in a metal suit. That's actually good. Genuinely, somebody in here can think." Frenchie pulled the release. The crusher came down through 14 feet of air. Tony killed his own magnetics, dropped out of the field, and let it hit the floor where he had been. The floor took it badly. What Tony did next took them 9 seconds to understand. He did not run for the door. He walked to the wall panel, put his working hand on the breaker housing, and pushed a 4-inch spike of his own gauntlet into the main feed. The magnets died. The lights died. The EMP and the light fixtures died with them, because Frenchie had wired it off the same bus, and that was the only mistake in an otherwise excellent room. Then the catwalk went, because the crusher impact had sheared 2 of the 4 mounting bolts, and 80 feet of steel walkway started to fold with 3 men standing on it. Butcher went down first, 22 feet, straight onto concrete. He did not land on concrete. He landed on Tony, who had crossed the floor in the dark and taken the drop on his back plate, and the noise the armor made was the noise of something structural giving up. Mother's Milk grabbed a hanging chain. Frenchie did not, and Frenchie fell into the nitrogen fog, and Tony reached him in 4 steps and dragged him out by the collar with a gauntlet that had stopped closing properly. Nobody said anything for a while. Frenchie was coughing on his hands and knees. Butcher was flat on his back with a man in a broken suit standing over him. Tony flipped the faceplate up. "Your shipment was fake," he said. "I knew that at 11:12. I came anyway because if it wasn't, there were infant doses in a truck and somebody had to be there. That's the whole thing. That's all of it." He held up the dead gauntlet. "No powers. Never had any. You want a blood draw? Take one now. Take one Tuesday. Take one every week for a year. I'll hold the tourniquet." Mother's Milk got down off the chain and did not raise the shotgun again. Butcher stayed on the floor and stared at the ceiling. Then he said the thing that mattered, and he said it quietly, because he was not the kind of man who apologized out loud. "Why'd you catch me?" "Because I was closer," Tony said. That was it. That was the whole conversion. Not a speech, not a demonstration. A man who had every reason to let a hostile stranger hit the ground had put himself under him instead, on instinct, with the shoulder actuator already gone. Frenchie sat up and began, immediately, to talk about the breaker bus. He wanted to know how Tony had seen the wiring fault in a blackout. Tony told him he had seen it on the way in, at 1:52, because the fixtures had a bleed hum at 60 Hz, and no warehouse light hums at 60 Hz, unless something expensive is hiding behind it. Frenchie called him a name in French that Mother's Milk declined to translate. Butcher got up slowly. He walked a circle around the crusher, then around Tony, looking at the armor the way a butcher looks at a carcass, which was fair. "You know what they are," he said. "Vort. I know what they are. Then you know what they do to people who get in front of them." "They put out a press release," Tony said. "Then a lawsuit. Then an accident." Butcher nodded slowly, because that was exactly the order. He did not offer a handshake. He offered a rule instead. He said the crew did not take soups on board, did not take money, did not take orders, and did not take gear from anyone with a boardroom. Tony said he did not have a boardroom in this world, which was technically true, and privately the loneliest sentence he had said in weeks. Mother's Milk asked the practical question. He asked what happened when Homelander noticed. "He already noticed," Tony said. "He noticed 8 days ago. He's waiting to see if I'm a phase." At 3:40 in the morning, Butcher made a phone call in the loading bay. Tony could hear both ends because he had a directional pickup in the collar, and no shame about it. On the other end was a woman who had been paid $4,000 to put a shaped charge under a workshop door in Red Hook at dawn. Butcher listened to her confirm the placement. He looked back through the doorway at the man sitting on a crate, cutting his own dead gauntlet off his arm with a hacksaw because the release had frozen shut. "Yeah," Butcher said. "Pull it." The voice on the phone asked if he was sure. She said the door was already prepped and the money was already spent. "Keep the money," Butcher said. "Take the charge off the door." He hung up, spat, and stood in the cold for a minute longer than he needed to. Then he said, to nobody, that he had never once in his life been wrong about a soup, and that this did not count because Stark was not one, and if it turned out he was, Butcher would be back with something a great deal worse than a fridge. Inside, the hacksaw kept going. Within 6 weeks, his approval hit 71%. Vought spent $410 million a year on brand maintenance for the Seven. Billboards, morning shows, school assemblies, a movie. Tony Stark spent nothing. He had no publicist, no logo on a building, no press office, no interviews. He turned down every one of them, including a network that offered him a prime time hour and a blank check for the questions. The number climbed anyway. The first poll that anyone at Vought took seriously was internal. A tracking survey, run monthly, 2,000 respondents, the same instrument they had used since 2011. They asked which public figure people would want present during an emergency. Homelander had held that line at 68% for 4 straight years. In March, he was at 52. Stark, who had never once appeared on a vote platform, was at 71. The report went out at 6 in the morning to 9 executives. By 6:40 it had been recalled and reissued with the Stark row deleted. That did not change the number. It only changed who was allowed to see it. Focus groups were worse. Vought ran 8 of them in 4 cities, 12 people to a room, one-way glass, a moderator with a clipboard, and a $100 gift card per head. They showed clips. They showed Homelander catching a jet. They showed a train running a marathon for charity. They showed 40 seconds of shaky phone footage of a man in a half-painted suit, lying on his back under a fire escape on Van Brunt Street with a torque wrench. The fire escape clip tested at 94% favorability. It was the highest score the instrument had produced in its history. The moderator asked a retired postal worker in Cleveland why. She said, "Because he's under it." They pushed her. They asked what she meant. She said the other one stands on things. This one gets under them. Vought paid $112,000 for that sentence and then buried the transcript. The clips kept coming because everybody had a phone. He fixed the fire escape because a kid on the 3rd floor had told him the bottom ladder had not dropped since the summer, and a woman 2 doors down used a wheelchair, and the building had failed inspection twice with no consequences. It took him 9 hours. He replaced the counterweight, the pivot pin, and 11 bolts. He paid for the parts out of a wallet with $81 in it, because in this world he was not rich yet, and that detail got out too. Somebody filmed him eating a sandwich on the curb outside a bodega on Coffee Street. Turkey, no mayonnaise, wrapped in white paper. 4 kids sat down on either side of him without asking, which is the only permission that matters. In the video he is not talking to the camera. He is holding a phone the wrong way up so an 8-year-old can see something on the screen, and he is laughing at something the 8-year-old said, and his hands are filthy. That clip did 9 million views in a day. No caption, no music, no logo in the corner. There was a school bus on Hamilton Avenue with a jammed emergency door, and he was there in 12 minutes with a hydraulic spreader. And he left before the news trucks arrived. That was the pattern people noticed. He left before the cameras. Every hero anyone had ever seen arrived with the cameras. A political scientist at Columbia wrote 400 words about it and used the phrase absence of packaging. The piece was shared 600,000 times. Trust polling split the country in a way Vought had never seen. Among people under 30, Stark was at 83%. Among veterans, 79%. Among police union households, a demographic Vought owned outright, he was at 62% and rising. He had no position on any political question and had refused to give one, twice, on camera, saying he fixed things and other people could argue about them. Merchandising told the real story. There was no merchandise, so people made it. A screen printer in Bay Ridge sold 11,000 shirts with a hand-drawn circle on the chest and got a cease and desist from Vought Legal for a design Vought did not own. The letter leaked. Sales tripled. There was one more number, and it was the one that frightened the 82nd floor. Vought's own crisis polling asked a hypothetical every quarter. If a hero and a company disagreed publicly, who would you believe? For 9 years, the company had never fallen below 55%. In April, it came back at 19%. Not because people had started believing heroes, because a third of the sample wrote in a name that was not on the card. A senator's office ran its own version and got the same result in Ohio. A chief of staff phoned Vought Government Affairs and asked, off the record, whether Stark had any interest in running for anything. The answer came back within the hour, and it was one word. No, that was worse. A man with 71% and no ambition cannot be bought out, primaried, or waited out. 90 floors up, none of this was discussed out loud. Homelander read his analytics every morning at 7:15, alone, in a private dining room with a view of the whole borough. The report came on paper because he preferred paper. Favorability, share of voice, sentiment, top comments. For 4 years, the top comments had been about his smile. In March, the top comment across every platform, for 11 days running, was a variation of the same sentence. It said Stark shows up when nobody is filming. He read it on a Tuesday. He set the paper down. He said nothing to the aide who had brought it. And he smiled at her. And he thanked her by name. And he asked her to close the door on the way out. Then he put his hand flat on the marble table and pressed down until it cracked in 4 places from the center out. The table was replaced by noon. It cost $31,000, and it was billed to facilities as water damage. 3 days later, he took a service elevator to a maintenance floor Vought used for nothing and put his fist through a load-bearing column. Structural engineering logged it as settlement. The following week, a delivery jet on the roof pad lost its landing gear. Both sides sheared clean, and the pilot swore the aircraft had been sound at wheels down. Vought paid him $700,000 for a signature. Nobody filmed any of it. That was the point. He had spent his entire life being watched and had discovered, at 30-something, the specific pleasure of breaking something where the audience could not benefit. Ashley scheduled a response. Vaught's answer to 71% was a campaign called Real Heroes, $40 million over 8 weeks, featuring Homelander visiting a burn unit and a firehouse and a middle school in Queens. The photography was flawless. It moved his number 2 points. Then it dropped 3. At the 8-week review, an analyst with 14 years at the company said the sentence that ended his career. He said the problem was not the ads. He said the problem was that the audience now had something to compare the ads to. He was thanked for his candor and let go on a Friday. Homelander flew that night at 14,000 feet above the cloud deck, where nothing can see you, and there is nothing to hit. He hung there for 40 minutes in the cold and the dark. Then he dropped to 2,000 feet over Red Hook and hovered above a 4-story brick building with a light on in a ground-floor workshop. And he watched a man carry a sheet of titanium across a room, alone, at 2 a.m. He did not go down. He told himself it was because the timing was wrong, and the optics were wrong, and there were procedures, and Madeline would want to handle it properly. Underneath that, closer to the bone, was a thought he had never once had about another living person, and he turned it over in the dark and did not like the shape of it. He wondered what the man was building. The morning it happened, the suit was at 64%, and Tony was carrying a coffee. He was 2,000 feet over the East River, running a routine he ran twice a week, mapping the city's emergency response gaps by flying them himself. There were 940,000 people below him. There were also, because it was a Thursday in April, 11 news helicopters in the corridor covering a ribbon cutting at the new Vought Tower observation deck. That detail mattered later. It mattered more than anything in the suit. Homelander came out of the sun at 400 miles an hour and hit him in the chest. There was no warning, no exchange of words, nothing that would have looked like a fight starting. 1 second Tony was in level flight. The next he was going sideways across the river at a speed the suit could not read, and the chest plate had a handprint pressed into it 4 inches deep, and every alarm he had was screaming at once. He hit the water. 2,000 feet of fall, flat, and the river took him 30 feet down. power at 41%. 2 thrusters flooded, left arm not responding. He came up out of the water in a column of steam, and Homelander was already there, hovering, perfectly clean, hands at his sides, smiling the smile that had been on a cereal box for 11 years. "There you are," Homelander said. "I wanted to see it up close." Tony's faceplate was cracked from the corner. He kept his voice level, because level was all he had. "You could have knocked." That was the wisecrack. He did not make another one for the rest of the day. Homelander told him what was going to happen. He said it pleasantly at conversational volume over the noise of the river. He said Stark was going to hold a press conference and thank Vought for its patience and sign, and that if he did not, the workshop in Red Hook would burn with everyone inside it, and it would be electrical, and there would be an investigation, and the investigation would find that it was electrical. Then he took Tony by the throat plate and went straight up. They passed 1,000 feet in under 2 seconds. 4,000. 6. The temperature dropped 40 degrees. The suit reported airframe stress at 110% of rating, then 130, and something in the spine of it started to peel. At 9,000 feet, Homelander stopped and held him out at arm's length over the whole city. He asked Tony if he wanted to know what people were made of. He said he had learned it early. He said everyone was a bag of water and noise, and none of them had ever once said no to him and meant it. Tony said one word. He said no. Homelander laughed and let go. 9,000 feet. Terminal velocity in 11 seconds. The suit had 1 flooded thruster and 41%, and it would not stop the fall, and Tony did not try to stop the fall. He rolled, put his back to the ground, and burned everything he had left in one direction, sideways west, toward the corridor where 11 helicopters were flying a ribbon cutting. That was the entire plan. Get inside the cameras. Homelander came down after him and caught him at 4,000 feet in full view of a Channel 6 long lens, and by then Tony had already dumped the audio. Every phone, every scanner, every news feed in a 2-mile radius took the same signal, because the suit was a broadcast platform and always had been. The last 90 seconds went out live. Burn with everyone inside it. It would be electrical. All of it in that voice, in the smile, unmistakable, over 11 helicopter feeds that could not be recalled fast enough. Homelander heard his own words coming out of a news chopper's external speaker at 200 feet. He did the worst possible thing. He went for the helicopter. The eyes came on. Tony had been waiting 8 weeks for the eyes. He had spent those weeks on one problem, and he had solved it with something that cost $11,000 and weighed 9 pounds. A sapphire optical flat, gold-coated 40 millimeters, mounted in a gimbal on the left forearm. Not a shield, a mirror. It could not survive a sustained beam. It did not need to. Tony put himself between the helicopter and the beam and turned the flat into it. The beam came back at 53% of its original energy, straight into Homelander's own face, and it went into his left eye. The sound he made was not human, and it was not heroic. He clapped both hands over his face and dropped 40 feet before he caught himself. He had been shot, stabbed, burned, hit by trains, dropped into reactors, and in 30-odd years of life he had never once felt pain. Not the idea of it. The thing itself. It arrived in a fraction of a second, in an eye that had never had a nerve tested, and it took his whole world away and replaced it with white. He screamed at a helicopter and missed it by 90 feet. He tore a hole through the 11th floor of an insurance building instead. Nobody was killed. 14 people were hurt by glass, which the coverage got to before it got to anything else. Tony did not press it. He could not press it. The mirror was slag. The arm was gone. The suit was at 9%. And there was a helicopter with 6 people in it, losing its tail rotor from debris and starting to spin. He went for the helicopter. He took it on the underside with a shoulder and one working thruster and put it down on the roof of a parking structure on Pearl Street at a descent rate the pilot later described as survivable and rude. All 6 walked off. The last thing on the live feed before the suit died completely was a man in broken armor on his hands and knees on a parking roof, face plate up, telling a screaming passenger to breathe out first, not in, out first. Above him, at 300 feet, Homelander hovered with one hand over his eye and looked down at the crowd. They were not looking at him. 8,000 people in the street below, phones up, filming the parking roof. He left. He did not fly away smiling. He went straight up, out of the frame, and he was gone before the first news anchor found a word for it. By evening it had a number. 240 million views in 9 hours. Vort's line was that a rogue, unregulated technologist had provoked a member of the 7 and endangered civilians. It moved nothing. There was footage. There was audio. There was a man in the wreckage of his own machine telling a stranger to breathe. Homelander sat alone in the dark on the 82nd floor, with a cold pack he did not need against an eye that had already healed. The vision came back in 4 hours. He had been told it would. He had waited anyway, in a chair, not moving, for 4 hours. That was the part he could not put down. Not the burn, the waiting. For 30 years the world had been a soft thing he could open with his hands. Every problem had ended the same way, at the same speed, and he had never once had to wonder how something would go. Now there was a man 12 miles away with a broken arm and no powers who had made him bleed his own light back into his skull, on camera, in front of the city, and would be awake tonight, building the next one. He could kill him. He knew he could kill him. He had known it the whole time, and he had gone up 9,000 feet and come down without doing it, and he understood now why. Killing him would not end it. Killing him would finish it, permanently, in the man's favor. Homelander sat in the dark and said it out loud, once, to an empty room. "I can't just kill you." 99 floors up, in a room with no windows, Vought stopped trying to win the fight. They had spent 4 months and roughly $11 billion trying to own Tony Stark. They offered him a seat. They offered him a country. They sent Homelander into the sky over Manhattan and got him back with a split lip and a burned collar, and the whole planet watched it happen. Force had failed. Money had failed. So the men in that room did the thing corporations do when they cannot beat a man. They stopped attacking the man. They started attacking the story about him. Ashley called it reputation management. The woman from legal called it a containment sequence. Madeline Stillwell, who never raised her voice at anything, called it what it was. "We're going to make America hate him," she said, slowly. So it feels like their own idea. The plan had 4 phases and a 9-week timetable. Phase 1 was doubt, not accusation, not scandal. Just doubt, the cheap kind, the kind that costs nothing and never washes out. It started with a question mark. a morning show segment 8 minutes long, titled "What Do We Actually Know About Tony Stark?" No claims, no sources. Just a calm host asking, on national television, whether anybody had ever seen his paperwork. Where was he born? Which agency cleared him? Who inspected the weapon he wore over American cities? The host smiled the whole time. That was the point. Smiling people do not look like liars. By that evening, the phrase "undocumented weapons platform" had been said aloud on Vote News 9 times. Tony watched the segment twice. He did not answer it. He was in Queens that night, 40 feet down a collapsed parking structure, holding a slab off a man's legs for 11 minutes while a crew cut him free. He came up at 2 in the morning covered in concrete dust and told a reporter the man's name and nothing else. It was the correct move and it was the wrong one, because silence is a shape, and Vought had already built something to pour into it. Phase 2 was the footage. They had 11 hours of him. Rooftop cameras, traffic cams, their own drones. And they had a facility in Reno with 41 people whose entire job was making pictures say things. They did not invent a new Tony Stark. That never works. They took a real one and moved him half a second. The clip that broke first was 19 seconds long. Brooklyn, the bridge, the moment the repulsor blast had gone wide and cracked a support column. In the real footage, Tony had thrown himself under that column and held it. In the clip, the column fell, and a woman in a red coat went under it, and the suit rose into frame and flew away. She had never existed. She was rendered in 8 days by a team that got her coat wrong by 1 shade and fixed it in post. They gave her a name. They gave her a sister. The sister was an actress from Cleveland who cried on camera for 6 minutes and never once had to lie about anything except who she was. It went out at 6:40 in the morning, when the fact-checkers were asleep. By noon, it had 210 million views. By 4 in the afternoon, it had been on every network in the country, including the ones that ran it to debunk it, which was better for Vought than the ones that ran it straight. Debunking a video means showing the video. Tony had the raw file inside 40 minutes. His systems found the seam, found the render pass, found the exact frame where the compression signature changed, and none of that mattered even slightly. He put the analysis online at 9:15 that morning. It was 70 pages long. 11,000 people read it. 210 million had already seen the woman in the red coat go under the column. He learned something that day that no fight had ever taught him. Truth is slower than a lie by a factor of about 1,000, and it always arrives after the funeral. Phase 3 was volume. They did not need to convince anyone. They needed the same sentence to arrive from 400,000 different directions until it stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like weather. Vought did not own the bot network. Vought rented it through a marketing firm in Prague for $4.2 million a month. And the invoices said Audience Engagement Services. 680,000 accounts, aged for years, posting about recipes and football so they would look like people. They started at 9 in the morning, in 11 languages. Nobody voted for him. He has a nuclear reactor in his chest, over a school. Ask him about Ghulmira. Where does the money come from? Why won't he show his face? What is he hiding under there? That last one had teeth because he did wear a mask, and because Vought's own people had spent 30 years teaching America that a hero shows you his eyes. Within 11 days, the words foreign weapons dealer appeared in a headline for the first time. Within 3 weeks, it was in the second paragraph. Within 5, it was the description. Said flatly, without hedging, by a man in a grey suit at 7 in the evening on the highest-rated broadcast in the country. His name was Cameron Coleman. He read what was in front of him, and he read it well. Tonight, the man calling himself Iron Man remains unregistered, unaccountable, and unwilling to explain his past. Federal sources describe a career built on arms sales to hostile actors overseas, a weapons dealer in a machine he built himself, flying unchallenged over your children. He said the word terrorist at 11 minutes past. He said it inside a quote from an unnamed official, which is how that word gets said on television. Phase 4 was the bounty. It never came from Vought. It came from a shell foundation, and it was framed as a public safety initiative, and it was legal in 38 states. $10 million for verified identity documentation. $25 million for the location of his primary workshop. It was posted on a clean white page with a serif font and a phone number. The cruelty was in the arithmetic. $10 million turned every neighbor, every delivery driver, every man who had ever fixed his sink into a person with a reason to look twice. And then they went into his own world for ammunition, which was the part he never saw coming, because there should not have been anything there to find. They invented Ghulmira, not the real one, a version. There was no record of Tony Stark in that world, no company, no stain, no cave, and so Vaught's people built a past the way they had built the woman in the red coat. Shipping manifests, a weapons expo in a country that had one. Photographs of crates in a desert with a logo they aged by hand. 3 men who swore, on camera, that they had bought from him. It was fiction. It was also the closest thing to the truth of anything they printed, and that was what took the ground out from under him. Because there had been a cave. There had been a convoy, and his own shells in the dirt around it, and a man named Yinsen who bled out on a workbench so that Tony Stark could walk. Vought had guessed at a sin and hit the real one blind, and Tony sat in the dark with the story on 9 screens and could not honestly say the shape of it was wrong. He had built weapons. Men had died holding them. He had spent a lifetime paying that down, and the bill had followed him across a universe. Approval, which had touched 78% after the rooftop, was at 31 and falling 4 points a week. His lawyers wanted to sue. He told them no. His security people wanted to move the workshop. He told them no. Rhodes was not there to talk him out of anything, and there was nobody else who could. At 2 in the morning he pulled up the doctored clip one more time and froze it on the woman in the red coat. She had a small mole on her jaw. Somebody had put it there on purpose, some artist in Reno, a detail added at 11 at night to make her real. She looked like somebody's mother. He sat with that for a long minute. Then he opened a channel to a number he had not used in weeks, and when Butcher picked up, sounding like a man woken from a nap he had not been having, Tony said only one thing. They didn't make her up out of nothing. Somebody drew her face. Find me the room where they drew it. 9 days later, a boy in Cleveland threw a bottle at him. It was a glass bottle, and it came from behind, out of a crowd of maybe 60 people, and it hit the back of the helmet and burst. The suit registered it as a 2-joule impact, and did not bother flagging it. It was nothing. A dent would have been more than it did. Tony turned around anyway. The boy was 14, maybe 15. He had his hand still out from the throw, and his face was doing something complicated, half terror and half a kind of pride, and behind him nobody was pulling him back. That was the part. 6 months earlier, a crowd would have grabbed that arm before it finished swinging. Now 60 people just watched, and a few of them had their phones up, and one man near the back was grinning. Tony lifted the faceplate. He wanted the kid to see a face. "Go home," he said. "Careful with glass." Somebody in the crowd shouted the word "murderer." It got a laugh. Not a big one. Enough. He flew out of there at 900 feet and did not run diagnostics for 11 minutes. The turn had been happening for weeks, but that was the day it had a sound. It was not hate, exactly. Hate would have been easier. It was permission. Vought had spent 2 months telling 100 million people that being cruel to this man was allowed, and once a thing is allowed, ordinary people will try it just to see how it feels. The numbers told it plainly enough. Approval at 22%. 61% of Americans now told pollsters he should be, in the wording of the question, taken into custody pending review. 3 states had filed suit. 2 mayors who had stood beside him on camera in the spring stopped returning calls. The bounty for his workshop had gone from 25 million to 40. Then came Hartsdale. It was a chemical fire at a rail yard, 4:20 in the afternoon, and it was the kind of call he had run 200 times. 4 tank cars, one of them venting, a wind out of the west pushing the plume toward a street of houses. He had 11 minutes before the second car went. He had done harder in worse. He came down on the road 2 blocks out because the road was the fastest line in. The crowd was already there, not a mob. That is the thing worth saying plainly. It was not a mob. It was people. A woman with a stroller. Men in work jackets who had come out to watch the smoke. Somebody had shouted that Iron Man was on scene, and 140 people had come toward the sound instead of away from it, because that was what they had learned to do in the spring, back when he landed and they cheered. But they had spent 9 weeks being told he was a weapons dealer. So they came, and then they stopped, and then they stood in the road. "Move," he said. "Please move." They did not. Some of them were filming. A man with a phone stepped directly into his path and held the camera up like a shield and said, "Say her name. Say the woman's name." She was never real. Tony said, "Say her name." He could have gone over them. He could have gone up and around 3 seconds of flight, and he did, and those 3 seconds were the 3 seconds he did not have. He came in over the yard at 11 past, and the second car let go under him. The blast took him 400 feet sideways into a signal gantry. It took the roof off a house on Delmar Street, and it took a 58-year-old rail worker named Aaron Pike, who had been 40 yards from the car, and who would have been 90 yards from it if a man in a suit had reached him at 10 past 4 instead of 11 past. Tony got him out. He got him out, and he did compressions on a gravel embankment for 19 minutes while the fire crew set up. And he kept going for 4 minutes after the paramedic touched his shoulder, because stopping is a decision, and he could not make it. Aaron Pike died on the embankment with the plume going orange above them. The suit's log said the delay had been 1 minute and 51 seconds. He did not tell anyone that number. He did not have to. Vought News led with it at 6. They had a graphic ready inside 2 hours, and the framing was not that he had been slow. The framing was that the crowd had been right to be afraid, and that a man who could not be stopped by 140 citizens should not be flying over anybody's town. By 9 that night, the top comment under every version of the clip said the same 3 words. He killed him. It rained at 11. He was sitting on a maintenance walkway at the back of the rail yard, out past the lights, where the gravel gave out into weeds. The suit was open at the chest. There was blood on the gauntlets that was not his. He had the faceplate up, which he almost never did outside, because the whole architecture of what he was depended on being a machine with a voice, and a man's face ruins that. He sat there for a long time in the rain. Nobody came. That was the true part of it. In the spring there had been crews and lights and people saying thank you, and now there was a rail yard and a wet walkway and a dead man's blood drying on his hands, and not one person in the country was looking for him. He thought about the boy with the bottle. He thought about Yinsen, who had told him not to waste his life, and who had never once seen a pole. He could have stopped. That was the thing nobody understood about that night. It would have been easy, and it would have been reasonable, and there was a version of Tony Stark who took the suit apart in a rail yard in the rain and went and lived quietly in a country with no cameras. He was allowed to. Everybody would have said he was allowed to. He sat with it until the rain got into the collar. Then he said the thing out loud, to nobody, in a voice that had nothing left in it. I built it, so it's mine. He said it again, slower, the way you say a thing you are checking for cracks. If I build it, I'm responsible for it. Not when it works, not when they clap. Every time. That's the whole deal. Nobody has to agree with me for it to be true. The rain came harder off the gantry above him. He closed the faceplate and stood up and went to work. The woman who walked into the machine shop on Van Dam Street changed the shape of the whole war, and she did it without a weapon, a power, or a single raised voice. She got in because she knew what the front looked like. The workshop had no sign. It had a roll door, a fire exit, and a coffee place next to it that Tony had bought outright 4 months earlier, so that nobody would ever install a camera in the window. She came at 2:40 on a Tuesday afternoon, in the rain, wearing a raincoat over a work blouse, and she stood in the middle of the roll door and put both hands out at her sides where they could be seen. The perimeter had her before she finished the gesture. 11 sensors, 3 drones off the ceiling rail, and a lock cycling behind her. She said, I know you can hear me. I have 11 minutes before my absence gets logged. Then she said, I'm from Reno. That got the drones to hold. Her name was Dana Okoye. She was 34. She had a master's in visual computing from Georgia Tech, and she had spent 6 years at Vault's narrative systems facility outside Reno, which the org chart called a post-production studio, and which had a badge tier above the vice president's. Tony came down the stairs without the suit. That was deliberate, and it was the biggest risk he took all year. He wanted to see what she did when there was just a man in front of her. She looked at him for about 4 seconds, and then she said, You're shorter than the footage. He did not smile. He asked how she found the shop. I didn't, she said. Legal did 8 days ago, from a power draw record. It's in a memo. 4 people have seen it. That's the other reason I'm here. He asked her to prove she was who she said she was, and she did not reach for a badge. She sat down on a rolling stool in the middle of his floor, and she told him about the woman in the red coat. She told him the internal file name. She told him the coat had been rendered in a shade the client rejected twice, and that the mole on the jaw was not in the brief. It was added at 11 at night by a junior artist named Beau, who thought the face looked dead without it. She told him the woman had been built off a body double-filmed on a soundstage in Burbank on a Thursday, and that the plate she was composited into had 11 frames of Tony holding the column, which had been painted out by hand because the automated pass kept leaving a red edge along the shoulder. Then she took out a drive and put it on the bench and stepped back from it. "Unedited master," she said. 11 hours. Every camera, including yours going under that column, which you already know, and including the audio, which you don't have, because Vought pulled the audio the same night and nobody's asked about it since. He asked why the audio mattered. "Because you can hear yourself on it," she said. "You're saying, 'Get out, get out, get out,' and you're saying it under 9 tons of concrete. That's 40 seconds nobody in this country has ever heard." He did not touch the drive. He looked at her for a while. Then she asked him the question. She did not ask it as a challenge. She asked it the way people ask a thing they have been carrying up a hill. "Why do you keep going out there?" He started to answer with something quick, and she cut across it. "No. Don't do the line. I've cut 1,100 hours of you, and I know your lines. 22% of the country wants you arrested. A kid threw a bottle at you and nobody stopped him. 2 nights ago you knelt in gravel for 19 minutes on a man who was already gone, and tomorrow morning you'll go up again. I want to know why, and I want the real one, because I'm about to lose my career and possibly my life, and I would like to know what I'm losing it for." The rain hit the roll door. He put his hands on the bench. He said it plainly, and he said it slowly, and it was the only time in the entire year he said all of it out loud. "I built weapons," he said. "For a long time. They were beautiful, and they worked exactly the way I designed them. And then one day I was standing in the dirt in front of one with my own name stamped on the casing, and it went off, and I lived, and other people didn't. That's the whole story. There's no version where somebody tricked me. I knew what they were." He said, "Everybody wants to be told they were fooled. I wasn't fooled. I was proud." He said, "So here's what I decided. And I decided it while I was bleeding. So I've never been able to talk myself out of it. If I make a thing, I own what it does, not the company, not the buyer, not the government that signed the paper. Me. Personally. Forever." He said, "That's it. That's the whole rule. Everything after that is just arithmetic." Then he said the part that answered her. "The suit is a thing I made, which means every day it sits in a case and somebody dies who it could have reached. That's mine too. Doesn't matter what the polls say. Doesn't matter if the country hates my face. A poll isn't a moral position, it's a mood. Nobody has to clap. It isn't payment, it was never payment, and the day I need it to be payment is the day I've turned into them." He said, "They can make me a villain. Fine. They can't make me a bystander. That's the one thing on this earth that's still mine to decide." Dana Okoye sat on the stool and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." She said it the way people say it when something has been settled permanently. She told him she had not come only with the master file. She told him the rest fast because she was down to 4 minutes. Vought was not going to let the media campaign finish on its own. There was a second phase, and it had a date. In 19 days, Vought was staging a live event in Chicago, a stadium, 40,000 people, a domestic terror scenario with the 7 arriving to save the crowd on camera. She had cut the promo package 3 weeks ago, which was how she knew, because you cannot cut a promo for a rescue that has not happened yet. She said the working title on the file was Restore Confidence. She said Homelander was not the point of it. The point was the last 90 seconds of the run of show, which had a slot reserved, no footage attached, and a single line of description she had read 11 times. Unregistered asset intervenes. Asset does not survive. They were not going to fight him in Chicago. They were going to write his death into a broadcast and then produce it in front of 40,000 people, with a crowd conveniently in the blast radius, so that whatever they did to him would look like something he had done to them. She stood up and pulled the raincoat back on, and she was shaking, which she had not been the entire time she was talking. Tony asked her what she wanted. Money, a country, a new name. She said no. She said, I drew a dead woman who never existed, and I gave her a mole so she'd look loved. I'd like to do something else with the rest of it. Then she was gone into the rain, and the roll door came down behind her. Tony stood alone in the shop with an 11-hour drive on the bench and 19 days on a clock, and for the first time since Hartsdale, something in his chest was working properly again. He did not open the file. He opened a line to Butcher. 19 days, he said. They picked the stadium. Get everyone in a room. Within 9 hours, Vought put 41 soups on the street. Not the 7. The 7 were Brand. Brand had to be protected. What Vought sent instead was everything below the line, the second tier, the ones who worked mall openings and regional news and small-town parades. 41 contracts, activated at once, all of them told the same thing by the same lawyer on the same conference call. There is a man in this city operating without a license. He is armed. He is dangerous. He is not one of us. Bring him in. Tony watched the call go out from a rented sublet above a laundromat in Queens. 6 monitors, a coffee maker he had rebuilt for no reason, and the defector's stolen credentials still holding. He could see the deployment map before the soups on it could. Grid squares lighting up amber as each one accepted. He did not run. He spent the first 90 minutes doing something that would have looked, to anyone watching, like a man doing nothing. He read 41 files. Powers, limits, medical histories, injury reports, the psych evaluations Vought was legally required to take and legally permitted to bury. He read every one of them the way he had once read a failed engine. Because a power is just a system, and every system has a load it cannot carry. By dawn he had cut 41 down to 5. The other 36 were muscle, flight, noise, avoidable. 5 could actually find him. He started with the fast one. Shockwave held the corporate record at 460 miles an hour on a straight run. His file also held something Vought had never put in a press release. 2 hip replacements at 26. The body was not built for what the blood made it do, and every stride was a small, controlled injury. Tony did not try to outrun him. He picked the street, 82nd between 2 blocks of scaffolding, 110 yards of clear asphalt with nowhere to turn out. He seeded it with 14 nozzles at ankle height. All of them fed from a tank of 2-part structural foam, the kind used to raise sunken highway slabs. In open air, it went from liquid to load-bearing in 400 milliseconds. Then he stood at the end of the street, and let himself be seen. Shockwave came at 390. The nozzles fired when he crossed the second sensor line, and 110 yards of road grew a soft white wall 6 inches tall. He hit it doing the speed of a small plane. The foam did exactly what it was built for. It did not cut. It did not break bone. It caught and stretched and spread the load across a full second instead of 100th of one, and it put him down the way a runaway ramp puts down a truck. He came to rest 30 feet away in a cocoon he could not tear. Tony crouched next to him. Nothing broken. You can thank the highway department. He left him there for the police, with the body camera footage already uploaded. The invisible one was harder. Translucent skin was carbon. Bullets skipped off it. Thermal did not see him because carbon did not radiate. Vought had spent 9 years telling the public he was undetectable, and the public had believed it, because nobody had ever asked the boring question. Tony asked it. If light goes around him, what happens to the air? Air did not go around him. Air got pushed. 190 pounds of man walking through a room displaces a measurable volume of it. Every step, forever. He wired the block. 60 microbarometers, cheap ones, the type used in weather balloons, stuck to lamp posts and mailboxes and window ledges across 4 intersections. Each one read pressure 1,000 times a second. Alone, useless. Networked, they were a room-sized ear. At 2:14 in the morning, the network heard someone breathing near a bus shelter on 9th. Tony did not look at the spot. He looked at the ground 12 feet past it and kept walking, and Translucent, who had spent his entire career being the smartest man in a room by default, followed him into an alley. The alley had a garbage truck in it. The truck was not a truck. 2,000 gallons of quick-set acrylic came out of the hopper at 40 pounds of pressure and painted the alley floor to shoulder height in 11 seconds. Carbon skin did not help. Being unseen did not help. The moment the resin found him, he became a man-shaped statue, visible, sealed to the ankles, arms locked, an airway kept clear by a snorkel Tony had already fitted to the nozzle head for exactly that purpose. You spent 9 years learning to be invisible. Tony said, Nobody ever taught you to be quiet. Cold Snap took 11 minutes. He could pull the heat out of a room and put a 2-inch rind of ice on a moving car. His limit was in his own file, in a line an intern had written, and nobody had ever read again. Extreme output causes localized frostbite in the operator's forearms. He was not a man who made cold. He was a man who moved heat, and he had nowhere to put it. Tony gave him somewhere. He walked into the confrontation carrying what looked like a shield, and was actually a phase change heat sink, 40 pounds of paraffin wax in an aluminum honeycomb. Cold Snap threw everything he had at it. The wax drank it. It could absorb the energy of a small building's worth of cooling before it even changed temperature on the outside. 90 seconds in, the soup's own hands went white. 2 minutes in, he stopped, because he could no longer feel his fingers. And stopped was all Tony had ever needed. Termite was the one that could have killed him. 3 inches tall or less, and small enough to go where no armor mattered. He had done it before. Vought had settled that one for $19 million and a sealed file. Tony read the file. Then he sealed every intake on the suit, every seam, every vent, and pumped the interior to 2 pounds over atmospheric, so that any gap in the plating blew air outward instead of drawing it in. Then he built a decoy, A spare gauntlet, hollow, warm, with an obvious flaw in the wrist joint, and a little heat bleeding out of it like an open door. Termite went in. The valve behind him closed at 40 milliseconds. Inside the gauntlet was a pressure trap, and the pressure was going the wrong way for a man who needed to grow to get out. He could not expand against 300 pounds per square inch. He was not hurt. He was simply, absolutely stuck. Tony held the gauntlet up to his ear and gave it a shake. You know, most people just knock. The fifth one never fought him at all. Doppelganger did not need to. Doppelganger could wear a face, and at 6:40 that evening a man with Tony Stark's face walked into a live news studio on 5th and said, on air, that he had been paid by foreign interests, that the videos were staged, that he was tired and he was sorry. It went out to 9 million households. Tony had been ready for it for 6 weeks. Every broadcast he had made since the rooftop carried a watermark nobody had noticed. Buried in the audio at 60 hertz, keyed to the actual electromagnetic signature of the reactor in his chest. Not a logo, not a password. A heartbeat that only existed inside him, unrepeatable, unwearable, and free for anyone on Earth to verify with a phone app he had published for nothing. The app ran on the broadcast in real time. 11 seconds after the fake started talking, 400,000 phones in 400,000 living rooms lit up with the same 2 words. Not verified. By 8 o'clock the studio had cut the feed. By 10, the clip of the failed check had 200 million views. By midnight, the phrase had escaped the internet entirely, and people were saying it about Vort's press releases, about the Seven, about the news anchors themselves. Not verified. 90 floors up, a phone was thrown hard enough to break a window that was rated for hurricanes. Homelander did not shout. That was the part that frightened the room. He straightened his cape, looked at the frozen frame of a man holding a gauntlet up to his ear, and spoke very softly. Enough. No more errand boys. He turned to the glass and the burning city lights below it. Tell him I want him in a stadium. 6 days later, Vought bought every screen in America for 4 minutes. It ran at 8 in the evening on all of them at once. Network, cable, streaming, the boards in Times Square, the little screens on the back of taxi seats. No logo at the start. Just a man in a blue suit standing in an empty stadium, filmed from low down, the way you film something you want to look taller than it is. Homelander said he had been quiet for too long. He said the country had been lied to by a rich man with a hobby. He said the word hobby with a small smile. The way you say it about a neighbor's model trains. He said there were people out there who had started to believe that safety could be bought at a hardware store. And he said gently that he understood, because fear makes people foolish. Then he named the date. Saturday, 7 o'clock. 91,000 seats, free, first come, first served, families welcome. A night to remind the country what it actually stood under. And at the end, with his hands folded, he added one more line. Bring your children. Nothing bad has ever happened where I am standing. The feed cut. Ticket demand crashed the site in 4 minutes. By morning, Vought had opened the parking structures for overflow, and the projected live audience was 130,000 people on site, and somewhere north of 200 million watching. Tony understood exactly what he was looking at. It was not a rally. It was a hostage list. 91,000 seats meant 91,000 reasons Tony could not simply not show up. and 130,000 reasons he could not show up and fight the way anyone would want him to. Homelander had done the only genuinely clever thing Tony had ever seen him do. He had chosen a battlefield made of children. The clock read 111 hours. Tony went down into the sublet basement, locked the door, and took out the vial. He had carried it for months. A shake of a hand on a rooftop, a glove with 3 hollow needles under the palm, and 11 microliters of the most valuable fluid on Earth. He had never used it because using it meant admitting he was going to need it. He ran it for 31 hours straight. What came back was not what the world assumed. Everyone assumed Homelander's skin was armor, some impossibly dense material, a thing you would need a tank round to get through. It was not. Under load, his tissue behaved like a fluid that had decided to be a solid. When force arrived, the cells stiffened together in a lattice and spread the impact across his entire body mass, so a strike meant for 4 square inches was carried by all 230 pounds of him. He did not resist force. He redistributed it, and a lattice has to be told what to do. Tony found the signal in the mitochondrial output. The reinforcement refreshed itself roughly 40 times a second, and it burned oxygen doing it, which explained the resting metabolic rate, which was 11 times a normal adult's, and had always been written off in his medical file as a curiosity. 40 times a second. Tony sat back in a bad chair in a bad basement and started laughing, and the laugh had no humor in it at all, because it meant the man was not invulnerable. He was fast. There is an enormous difference, and nobody in the history of the world had ever been able to exploit it, because nobody could hit him faster than his own body could answer. Hit him harder and the lattice spread it. Hit him faster than 40 times a second in the same place, and the lattice would still be busy answering the first hit when the 9th arrived. He did not need a bigger weapon. He needed a faster one. The next 70 hours were the most work Tony Stark had done since a cave. He tore down the repulsor. In its normal state, it built a charge and released it in one clean push, one hit, the way a punch works. He rebuilt the emitter as a pulse stack. 900 discharges per second, each of them small, each of them landing inside a footprint the width of a playing card. Individually, they would not break a windshield. Delivered in sequence into a lattice that could only reconfigure 40 times a second, they would arrive 22 deep before the body could answer the first one. He built 2. He tested them on a 5-inch billet of sintered ceramic that a full-power blast had previously only scorched. The pulse stack went through it in 11/100ths of a second and left a hole he could have posted a letter through. Then he built the second half, because 70 hours of physics still left one problem. 22 deep was not enough. He needed the lattice slower. The blood gave him that too. The reinforcement response was gated by a single enzyme, and enzymes are the easiest thing in the world to inhibit if you know their shape. He designed a molecule that fit it and nothing else in human biology, aerosolized it, and worked out the dose from body mass and respiration rate. It would not hurt him. It would not weaken him. It would take the refresh from 40 times a second down to somewhere near 12 for about 90 seconds, and only if he breathed it. 90 seconds. 12 hertz, 900 pulses. That was the whole plan, and Tony wrote all of it on one sheet of paper and burned the paper. There was a third thing he built, and it took longer than the weapon, and it was not a weapon at all. 240 flight-capable panels, each one about the size of a door, each one carrying a deployable energy screen rated for a sustained thermal load. They had no offensive capability whatsoever. They could not shoot. They could not even move fast. They could get between a laser and a crowd, and they could stay there. The workshop was full of them by Friday night, stacked to the ceiling, and anyone walking in would have assumed they were the least impressive thing in the room. Pepper would have asked why he had built 4 times as many shields as he had built guns. Rhodey would have known better than to ask. At 4:05 on Saturday morning, with 15 hours on the clock, Tony sat on the floor of the workshop with his back against a crate and looked at all of it. The pulse stack, the aerosol, the 240 doors. He knew how the night ended if it went wrong. He had run it 11 times. In 9 of them he died. He got up anyway and started loading the truck. Under the stadium, in a service tunnel no ticket holder would ever see, Vort's head of compound engineering typed a 9-digit code into a shipping container and then ran. The container held Asset 9. It had been a man once, for about 4 days, in a facility in Sage Grove. Then it had been given 22 times a normal dose, and now it was 19 feet tall and had no eyes, because the eyes had been the first thing the body decided it did not need. It heard. That was all it did. It heard, and it went toward the sound, and it took apart whatever was making it. Vort's plan was elegant in the way corporate plans are elegant. Homelander would fight Stark. Asset 9 would be released into the crowd. Stark would have to choose, and whichever one he chose, the footage would end with a dead building and 100,000 terrified people, and every single frame of it would be Stark's fault. They had already written the press release. It was scheduled to publish at 9:15. At 7:04, Homelander walked out onto the field to the loudest noise a human being had ever been given, and the roar went on for 2 full minutes, and he stood in the middle of it with his arms slightly out and let it wash over him. At 7:06, a truck's worth of flight panels came in over the north rim, low and slow, 240 of them, and they did not attack anybody. They took stations. They spread across the upper decks and the concourses and the parking structures like someone laying out chairs. 1 panel every 11 rows. The crowd looked up at them and did not know what they were, and Tony's voice came out of every one of them at once, calm, conversational, on a channel he had cut into Vort's own PA. Nobody has to leave, but if I ask you to get low, get low. Homelander laughed into the microphone and told the crowd not to worry, that the man was theatrical, that he had always been theatrical. Then he asked Tony to come down where people could see him. Tony came down. He landed on the 50-yard line in front of 130,000 people and 260 million on live feeds, and the suit was scuffed, and he did not pose. He said 1 sentence. Send them home first, and I'll stay all night. For a moment, on camera, in front of the entire country, Homelander hesitated, and every human being watching saw it happen. And that hesitation was the first crack. Then he took off, and he took the roof off with him. The next 4 minutes were the loudest thing that had ever been broadcast. Homelander went through the North Stand at 400 miles an hour, trying to catch a man who kept refusing to be where he was aimed. He missed again. He carved the beams out from under a section that seated 11,000, and the section began to fold. Tony did not shoot back once. He caught the fold. 18 panels dropped into the gap under the collapsing deck and locked into a static lattice, and 11,000 people came down 4 feet onto a floor that held, instead of 40 feet, onto concrete. 60 more panels pushed the crowd in the lower bowl toward the tunnels in a slow, orderly wall, the way you heard water. On 200 million screens, the split was total. On the left of every feed, a man in blue destroying a building. On the right, a man in red and gold putting his body and his machines between that destruction and other people, over and over, and never once swinging back. In Section 118, a man named Ray Okafor was carrying his 6-year-old up the steps when the deck went. He said afterward that he never saw the panel arrive. He said the floor simply stopped falling. He said it the way people say things they have not finished believing yet. That interview ran for 3 days on every network in the country, and not one of the anchors could work out how to cut away from it. Homelander came back through the South Rim and took out the scoreboard, 900 tons of steel and glass, and let it come down over the family sections because he had decided that Tony would either catch it or be exposed. 31 panels went under it and locked. The scoreboard hung there in the air at an angle, 11 feet above the seats, groaning, and it did not come any lower. Tony's power read 62%, and the suit had started telling him things he was choosing not to read. Asset 9 came up through the north tunnel at 7:14 and took the first thing it heard, which was a hot dog cart, and then went for the next sound, which was 30,000 people screaming. Tony broke off from Homelander mid-air to get in front of it. He did not fight it either. He read it in 9 seconds, the way he had read the file of a speedster. No eyes, head turning toward every impact. A creature made entirely of one sense. He gave it a better sound. 40 panels dropped their screens and became speakers, and they ran out toward the empty east parking structure, playing the exact frequency profile of a panicking crowd at 130 decibels, walking it away like a lure on a string. Asset 9 turned and followed the noise across 800 yards of asphalt and into a concrete stairwell, and Tony emptied 4 canisters of the enzyme inhibitor into it at a dose calculated for 2,000 pounds of body mass. The thing went down onto its knees and then onto its side, and it was still breathing when it stopped moving. Tony crouched next to it for 1 second. "Sorry, pal, somebody did this to you too." Then Homelander hit him from above at terminal velocity and put him through the roof of the east structure, 4 floors of it, into the foundation. The suit reported 41%. 2 ribs. Left gauntlet dead. Homelander landed in the crater and did not rush, because he had decided this part was going to be enjoyed. He said Tony had made him look small for a year. He said the world would understand once it was over. He said the word insect. And Tony, flat on his back in the concrete with blood in his mouth, said the only joke he made all night. "You know what I noticed. You always check the cameras first." Homelander's eyes lit, and Tony, who had been counting, rolled. The heat vision went past his head and into the wall. And the wall was not a wall. It was a panel, angled at 41 degrees, made of the same reflective ablative he had spent 6 days grinding. And the beam came back into the roof and dropped 200 tons of parking structure onto both of them. In the dust, with everything blind, Homelander did what he always did. He inhaled to shout. That was the whole design. 90 seconds of aerosol had been sitting in that dead air since the moment they went through the floor, invisible, odorless, waiting for a man who had never once in his life considered that breathing might be a mistake. 12 hertz. Tony got up on one knee and put the pulse stack against his chest and fired for 11/100ths of a second. 900 discharges a second into a lattice too slow to answer any of them. The sound was not an explosion. It was a single flat crack, like a car door closing in an empty garage. Homelander went 80 feet backward through a stairwell and did not get up. He was not dead. Tony had run that too, and had built for it. He was conscious and breathing, and for the first time in his entire manufactured life he was hurt, and he lay in the rubble with a chest full of something that felt exactly like every human being he had ever looked down on. He was not defeated by that. He was defeated by what happened next. Because 260 million people had just watched, uncut, on 11,000 phones from 11,000 angles, one man tear down a stadium full of families to get at somebody, and another man spend the entire fight standing in front of those families with his back to the enemy. The rally was supposed to make him beloved. Instead, Vought had built him a stage, put 130,000 witnesses in it, and lit it perfectly. Nobody cheered when he stood up. That was the part he could not survive. 130,000 people, and not one sound. And then somewhere in the upper deck a single woman shouting at him to get away from her son, and then 1,000 people shouting it, and then all of them. Homelander looked up at a crowd he had owned for 15 years and heard what it actually thought of him. He rose about 6 feet off the ground, unsteadily, one hand on his chest. Then he turned and went straight up, through the cloud layer, until the cameras lost him, and the stadium was left with a hole in the roof and a man in a broken suit sitting on the concrete with his helmet off. Tony did not watch him go. He was already looking at the tunnel where the medics were. He got his feet under him, spat blood on the 50-yard line, and walked toward the wounded. The market opened on Monday and did not stop falling for 9 days. Vought International lost 31% in the first 4 hours of trading. By Wednesday it was 58. 6 pension funds announced they were divesting, and then 11 more, and then the state of California, and none of them said the word Homelander in the press release because they did not have to. Every screen in every trading floor in the world was already playing the same 11 seconds on a loop. A man in blue pulling the beams out of a stand full of families. A man in red putting a wall in front of them. Advertisers do not have morals. They have models. And the models said the same thing the pension fund said. Vaught's own board voted to suspend the Seven's public appearances on Thursday morning. The vote was unanimous. It was the first unanimous thing that board had done in 11 years. And the man they were suspending could have killed all of them in about 9 seconds. And they did it anyway, because for the first time they were more frightened of the crowd. The defector went public on Friday. No leaked document, no anonymous source, no shadowed silhouette. A resignation letter on a plain white page, a name at the bottom, and a 9-minute video filmed sitting at a kitchen table with no lighting kit and no makeup. 18 years at Vought, 4 years running Hero Management, the Compound V pipeline, the pediatric injections, the settlements, the sealed files, the $19 million paid to a family who were told their daughter had died of an aneurysm. Not verified, the world had been saying for weeks about everything Vought put out. This one verified. 41 federal subpoenas went out over the following month. Congress finally used the word product in a hearing, out loud, about a person, and a clip of a senator saying it did more damage than any of the footage. But the thing Tony did not see coming was smaller than any of that. It started in Baltimore with a retired machinist and a fire escape. A woman filmed him bolting a homemade blast panel to the outside of her daughter's school window, a sheet of ablative he had built in his garage from plans somebody had traced off Tony's own published diagrams, because Tony had never patented a single piece of the shielding. He had put all 240 designs online the morning after the stadium, free, in 11 languages. Within 6 weeks, there were shield panels on 900 school buildings. Then 11,000. Volunteers welding brackets on weekends. A group of engineering students in Cleveland got the manufacturing cost down to $19 a panel and published that, too. None of them had powers. That was the entire point. And the country worked it out faster than any of the institutions did. Somewhere in there, the language changed. People stopped saying soup like it was a species and started saying employee. Butcher watched it on a small television in a bar in Newark with the sound off. He had spent his adult life certain of exactly one thing, which was that no man who could fly had ever been worth the air he displaced, and that anyone who put on a costume was announcing what he intended to do to you. He had built a life around it. It had cost him nearly everything he had. He watched a machinist bolt a plate to a school window. Huey asked him what he thought. Butcher drank about half his beer before he answered, and then he set the glass down and looked at the screen for a while longer. "Yeah, all right," he said. "Maybe the Tin Man's all right." Then he told Huey to close his mouth and get another round in. And that was as close to a conversion as anyone was ever going to get out of him. Tony did not do a victory press conference. He spent the following spring on the ribs, which had not healed correctly, and on a compound that stripped the V receptors out of a person's blood, and on a workshop full of people who wanted to know how to build things. Vought had spent 40 years selling a story. The story was that safety comes from above, that it is born, that it is in the blood, that it belongs to a small number of chosen people, and that the rest of the world's job is to look up and be grateful and buy the merchandise. A man with a hole in his chest and no powers whatsoever took that story apart on live television in front of 130,000 witnesses by refusing to be stronger and insisting on being better. He was never the most powerful thing in that stadium. He was just the only one in it who had decided, personally, that he was responsible for what he built and for who stood behind him. That is the whole difference. Not the suit, never the suit. And that is the thing worth sitting with, because Tony Stark was one man out of dozens. And the door he came through swings both ways. So what happens if it isn't him? What if the man who lands in this world is a soldier from 1945 who still believes in the flag Vought put on Homelander's cape? What if it is a scientist who cannot control his own anger in a country that films everything? What if it is a god, a king with an army, or a kid from Queens with rent to pay, and a company like Vought offering to make him famous at 15? Which one of them survives this world? And which one of them does it change?